Hello there, my name's Stephen MacKenzie and I'm delighted to bring to you the next presentation in the Share City virtual conference series. This presentation is about the online toolkit we created called Share It. Share It is a sustainability impact assessment toolkit designed specifically for food sharing initiatives. There is a huge amount of overlap between the activities and overall objectives of the food sharing initiatives that were documented in the mapping and ethnographical phases of the Share City project, and the big picture sustainability issues facing food systems. Some of these issues are very old, such as large scale levels of food waste and the general level of access to affordable and nutritious food and how uneven that is. And some of these are newer trends, such as the increased trend for dining alone, and the links and synergies between that trend and general negative trends in modern society for loneliness. While it's clear that some food sharing initiatives are having relevant impacts for these areas, for instance, engaging in large-scale redistribution of food to reduce food waste, or putting on community canteens so that people can enjoy shared meals together who might not otherwise have the chance to, the reporting and understanding of the impacts of these initiatives is patchy at best. In an earlier analysis of 37 case studies in 9 cities in the Share City project, it was shown that in 30% of those cases, they had stated goals related to food sustainability that were part of almost their mission statements, but these were not accompanied by any impact reporting, and less than half of the impact statements that were given in that analysis were quantitative in any way. Many initiatives were found, when asked, that they would like to improve their analysis and communication of their impacts, but how do they go about it? So that was obviously the clear objective for developing Share It. We looked to create an open access online tool that would hopefully allow food sharing initiatives to understand and communicate their impact on the sustainability of food systems in a way that was designed for their purposes, for their activities. And in order to achieve that, the first step that we took down that road was to go through a co-design process with them to try and ensure that we made something that was useful. That happened in 4 phases over 2018 and 2019. Phase 1 was the kind of core co-design process that we went through with 6 initiatives, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. And then from there, after the core co-design phase, we went through a phase of working with the web developers on this project. Our partners for this project were the team from Symmetry Solutions, and at the end of that we created an online working version of the toolkit, which we then took back to the co-design initiatives and some other initiatives for a round of beta testing, again to get feedback on whether what we'd created was usable and useful to them. And then finally, actually in January of 2020, after making some changes following the beta testing, we publicly launched the Share City Toolkit. But first I'm going to talk about the co-design work that was done in 2018. So that work had 3 phases, essentially 3 workshops conducted with the co-design partners to try and find out what they would want from such a toolkit and what they were doing at the moment in terms of sustainability reporting. From there we kind of came up with a set of potential sustainability indicators and some other things, some other kind of base concept for the toolkit that might be relevant to the specific co-design partners, and tested those and tested their thoughts with those in a kind of structured workshop. And then again, after getting feedback from that, we went back and refined the toolkit and produced, certainly for the sustainability impact assessment side, a indicator suite that we intended to use to capture the impacts of these food sharing initiatives, and some other ideas and concepts that I'm going to go over in a minute, which came out of the feedback that we got during the co-design process. And some of the main things that came out during the co-design process were that the initiatives were very interested in how they could use sustainability impact reporting and wanted to increase their engagement and improve their engagement with it, but they didn't want to increase the workload in terms of paperwork and intensive data collection that would take up lots of people's time. There was a lot of feedback that from several cases that really what they were doing was not just about their impacts on the physical system, whether they were just how much food they were saving, how much food they were growing in the case of community gardens, and that so far less emphasis had been put on them from funders, and there was less interest in the educational side of what they were doing, the fact that they were developing knowledge and skills and an affinity to the food system, an affinity to how to use food, how to cook with it and things like this. There was quite a bit of back and forth discussion about over the concept of sharing and food sharing in different settings and the temporal considerations around this. It's quite it's proved to be quite a tricky issue in terms of trying to think about whether interactions that happen on a specific basis of regularity or need a certain level of intensity between participants in food sharing to get some of the benefits that these organisations believe in certain cases they're having that can't be had, say, from more fleeting interactions or those that happen on an irregular basis. And the academic literature is patchy on that, and it's something that needs to be followed up on in future work. And finally, one of the things that was very important in terms of the output from the co-design was this feeling of a lack of connectedness with other food sharing initiatives, and the idea that there could be some benefit from being connected with initiatives that were doing similar things in different countries or going about an issue with a different approach. And basically there seemed to be a huge desire to connect with other food sharing initiatives, which partly came out of some of the knowledge of the database that Share City had created and the idea that could be quite a useful tool as well. So on the basis of that, we actually decided to go with creating a toolkit that had three main functions. Initially, we probably just planned to do something around what we ended up creating as the Toolshed, which was a kind of core tool where initiatives could put their information in and get a sustainability impact report out. So obviously we continued with that idea and we created something that effectively was flexible in the cases that it had, and hopefully applied and had relevance to lots of different types of food sharing initiatives. And the idea was that they could, from entering the relevant information in that portal, get a sustainability impact report and a 3-page impact summary of their activities. But there were two other areas of the Share It that we decided to create in the end, and one was the talent garden, which is effectively a space for initiatives who use Share It to show off what they're doing and show off their activities, whether that's through short communications. They can upload videos or images with captions and post these, and I'll show you what that looks like a bit later in the presentation. But they can also use this area to upload the sustainability impact reports that they've made to have a space along with all the other channels and websites and social media that they have, where they can show their impacts on a public website. And finally, again on the issue of connecting food sharing initiatives with each other, we also created the greenhouse. And the greenhouse is a space where we hope eventually food sharing initiatives will be able to connect with each other based on kind of shared interests and shared properties, whether that's, for instance, a shared interest in reducing food waste or a curiosity about how some people overcame, for instance, regulatory challenges in setting up community fridges. But going back to the Toolshed, what we ended up creating out of the co-design process was a bespoke set of sustainability indicators that could specifically communicate the impact of food sharing initiatives on the sustainability of food systems, accounting for interesting activities that they engage in that other types of organisations don't, such as increasing the levels of meal sharing, increasing the friendship and support network in participants, particularly in the cases of community gardens, community canteens, things like this, and also the potential for food sharing initiatives to influence the choices and values of participants with respect to food, and giving them some ideas on how they might look at collecting relevant data on that in the future if they're not doing so already. And if you want to find out more about the real details of the indicator suite and the impact framework that we created for the Toolshed in Share It, there's a link to the paper that we published last year in Environmental Impact Assessment Review, which goes into that in detail in terms of the just academic justification. Now, so we got that far, we knew what we wanted to create, and then we went away with the web developers and created effectively an online system for Share It, although this wasn't public at this point, and we got to that point by around June 2019. Now, from there, we then came back to, in the end, 8 food sharing initiatives in Dublin, London and Berlin to beta test what we've created, and the beta tested focused particularly on the user experience of the Toolshed, although some of those initiatives did also engage with the talent garden and ended up posting things on there, and I'll show you some of those a bit later. Now, that beta testing process had 3 phases. Effectively, initiatives were given access to the online system of Share It, and all the material that we'd made around that, and were given some kind of time to explore that and see what they made of it themselves. In almost all cases, there was a face-to-face meeting, or if not a virtual meeting, that was held after that to kind of go through, maybe assist with anything that they didn't understand and discuss their user experience of using the toolkit. And the idea of going through all this in general was that they would actually complete a sustainability impact assessment report with Share It. And then once they had done that, or even if in cases where they hadn't had time to, or they couldn't do that, we still solicited feedback from them about their experience of using the tool, either through a kind of formalized online questionnaire, or if not, through conversations and things that they brought up during the whole process with us. And from there, that was all kind of taken away and analysed to try and, again, do another lot of reflection on what we've created, and there were some kind of major things that came out of that beta testing process. And one of the things was that the biggest strength of the toolkit was, from the initiative's perspective, this 3-page sustainability impact assessment report that was created. And there is real hope that this can become a potentially valuable communication tool aimed at funders, policymakers, generally as part of their reporting infrastructure, to use a tool that gives them a kind of structured sustainability impact report, which is developed specifically for the case of food sharing and the type of activities that they do. And then obviously can be some improvements, some tweaks to that, but that was a big positive for us that they viewed that positively, and that also all the beta testers who filled out the online survey about their experience felt that Share It could be a useful tool for their organisations. Now, there was some important caveats in the feedback that they gave us about Share It, and some of the main weaknesses in what we've created were identified. And one of those was particularly based around the idea that there were a lot of options in the Toolshed, particularly for places to input data. And this created a perception that with this number of options, that the data requirements to create a sustainable impact report was quite onerous. And it's tied in with this problem that there's such a wide range of indicators, all of which were not relevant to an individual user. There's quite a lot of stuff, for instance, in there for community gardens that might not be relevant for an organisation that redistributes food, which we knew was going to be a challenge going into this project. but it became quite clear from their feedback that probably more needs to be done with the tool to deal with that, to make things more specific to the users as they're going through using the tool. And again, that's all been written up as a piece of academic research and it's still under peer review, but you can certainly get in contact with us if you want further details about the process of that and what we got out of it in terms of the idea of engaging food sharing initiatives with sustainability impact assessment as a concept. So in general, from all that, it was quite clear that Share It has some kind of challenges to overcome if it's going to become a useful kind of online tool for food sharing initiatives. It needs to ensure that the Toolshed is accessible and informative for initiatives when they may have little time and resources to actually dedicate to impact reporting. And we designed it as best we could, we thought, to try and overcome that challenge, but still it clearly probably needs more work based on everything that we got out of the co-design and beta testing process. And the flip side of that challenge is that the outputs need to be, if it's going to be used as the kind of communication tool aimed at policymakers to show and funders to show how impactful food sharing initiatives are, it needs to be considered rigorous enough by them and kind of fit their focus of what they're looking for from that side of things. And that's some work that the project hopes to continue doing in the future in testing that with them. As I mentioned, making Share It and the Toolshed relevant and flexible for a huge range of different types of food sharing organisations is positive because it gives the project a kind of wide audience at which to aim for, but it's also a bit of a curse in terms of the user experience, and we are seriously looking at particularly options such as user pathways to improve on that and make sure that the flexibility doesn't become an issue for that side of things. Generally, with the type of organisations that food sharing initiatives are, the project will in the future look at alternative strategies for engaging initiatives in a way that suits them, to use Share It to create impact reports and engage with the talent garden and the greenhouse, and that will be the next phase of work effectively that goes on doing that, to try and build up a user base by looking at strategies of engagement with Share It. And finally, the project will always need to be aware of the ethical considerations about the application of quantitative sustainability assessment for food sharing initiatives, because they're because they're small organisations, because their activities and impacts aren't always easily captured quantitatively, and we need to be aware of not getting sucked down into the rabbit hole of trying to quantify things that just can't be quantified, but at the same time highlighting that there is real impact going on in certain important areas of the food system. So I just thought I'd add in here the links to the live Share It Toolkit website, which you can visit and see everything that's on there, as well as the link to the Getting Started with Share It blog for anyone who might be interested, any initiatives who might be interested in using the tool, or anyone who wants to check it out in generally. You can see there the picture of myself and Professor Davis pressing the figurative red button earlier last year when we launched the toolkit. You can also check out the Talent Garden. As I mentioned before, some initiatives have kind of posted their stories and impact summary reports in the Talent Garden already, so you can see what they've put up there. And we hope that garden will grow, so to speak, as more initiatives use the Share It Toolkit. So I'd just like to finish off with some conclusions about the project. Share It was always conceived as a combined research and engagement tool, and we really hope that by engaging food sharing initiatives we can actually ultimately increase the understanding of the impact that food sharing is having around the world in a way that's actually useful to them at the same time. We hope that the Toolshed as a function in itself responds to the lack of appropriate supports for food sharing initiatives in communicating the impacts that they're having in a formalized kind of sustainability impact assessment structure. We hope that The talent garden will ultimately help in the communication aspect of this and allow people to understand further the value of shared experiences relating to food. And we really hope to build on all the work that went into setting up Share It in the first place, to ensure that it becomes a useful resource over time for food sharing initiatives and their engagement with sustainability impact assessment. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation about Share It as part of the Share City virtual conference. I'd just like to thank particularly all the initiatives that were involved in the co-design and beta testing of Share It. And again, a big thank you to Symmetry Solutions for all their hard work and patience in getting the toolkit online. Please get in contact with the project if got any questions about Share It through any of the channels shown here. We would love to hear from you. Thank you very much.